A racist cop tried to kick a black woman off a cruise ship, but a millionaire CEO trained in combat stepped in, humbled him in seconds, and then something unexpected happened. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Seattle's winter of 2008 felt colder than usual. The rain slashed sideways across Pike Place Market, driving most tourists indoors and leaving only the hardiest locals to brave the weather. Among them was Gabriela Johnson, a Brazilian immigrant who had earned her American citizenship through sheer determination. The 23-year-old adjusted her thin uniform jacket against the biting wind as she hurried toward the catering entrance of the market's event space. "You're cutting it close, Gabby," warned Susan, the catering manager, checking her watch with disapproval. "The Bennett Enterprises executives are already arriving." "Sorry," Gabriela replied, quickly tying her apron. "The bus was late again." Susan softened slightly. "Just don't let Mr. Harmon see you rushing in. These tech people tip well, but they expect perfection." Gabriela nodded, quickly arranging her dark curls into a neat bun before grabbing a tray of champagne flutes. She had worked at Pike Place for 3 years now, saving every possible dollar for the engineering degree she dreamed of pursuing. One day, she promised herself, she would be on the other side of these events. The room hummed with the quiet confidence of wealth. Men and women in tailored suits discussed market shares and acquisition strategies, barely noticing the staff that circulated among them. Gabriela moved efficiently, her practiced smile never faltering as she offered champagne and collected empty glasses. She was refilling her tray when she first noticed him. Richard Bennett stood apart from the crowd, not just physically, but in the way others orbited around him. As CEO and heir to the Bennett technology empire, he commanded attention with his mere presence. Tall, with classically handsome features and penetrating blue eyes, he looked like he had stepped from the cover of a business magazine, which, in fact, he often did. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Gabriela quickly lowered her gaze and continued working, unaware that she had captured his interest. Hours later, as the event wound down and the last executives departed, Gabriela gathered discarded napkins and empty glasses. "You have an interesting accent," a deep voice observed from behind her. She turned to find Richard Bennett leaning against the bar, his tie loosened slightly, watching her with undisguised interest. "Brazilian," she replied simply, continuing her work. "São Paulo? Rio?" Gabriela looked up, surprised. "Florianopolis. Most Americans don't know Brazil beyond Rio." "I'm not most Americans," he said with a slight smile. "Bennett Enterprises has an office in São Paulo. I've visited a few times." She nodded politely, unsure why the CEO of a major corporation was making small talk with a catering staff member. "You're finishing late," he observed. "Do you need a ride home? It's still pouring out there." Gabriela hesitated. The offer was tempting. The thought of waiting 30 minutes for the bus in the freezing rain was dismal. But she knew better than to accept rides from strangers, especially wealthy men who weren't accustomed to hearing no. "Thank you, but I'll be fine," she said firmly. Richard looked surprised, then impressed. "At least take my card. Bennett Enterprises is always looking for people with determination." As she accepted his business card, their fingers brushed briefly. Something electric passed between them, unexpected and undeniable. 2 days later, Gabriela surprised herself by calling the number. 3 days after that, they had dinner at a restaurant so exclusive it didn't even have a sign on the door. What began that night evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. For 2 years, Gabriela lived in 2 separate worlds. In one, she was still a waitress in Rainier Valley, living in a tiny apartment, counting pennies for tuition. In the other, she was Richard Bennett's secret, the woman he whisked away to luxury hotels and secluded cabins, whom he showered with gifts that arrived without cards, whom he desired intensely but never acknowledged publicly. She accepted the arrangement because she loved him and because she believed that eventually she would be enough. while the rational part of her mind recognized the imbalance in their relationship. Her heart held onto moments when he seemed to truly see her, not as an exotic diversion, but as someone worthy of respect. On a particularly gray November morning, Gabriella stared in disbelief at the plastic test in her hand. 2 pink lines, unmistakable, pregnant. Her hands trembled as she called Richard's private number. "Can we meet?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's important." "Is everything all right?" He sounded concerned but distracted. "I just need to see you, please." "I have meetings all day, but I could meet you at the pier near the market around 6. "Perfect," she agreed, heart racing. "See you then." Throughout the day, Gabriella rehearsed what she would say. Despite their unconventional relationship, she believed Richard would step up. They would finally bring their relationship into the light. She imagined telling her mother in Brazil, pictured a future where they raised their child together. The pier was deserted when she arrived, the November chill keeping even the most dedicated tourists away. Waves from Puget Sound crashed against the weathered wood as Gabriella paced nervously, the pregnancy test secure in her purse. Richard's silver Mercedes pulled up at exactly 6 o'clock. He emerged wearing a camel hair coat that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe, his expression unreadable as he approached. "What's so urgent?" he asked, not unkindly, but with the efficiency of a man whose time was valuable. Gabriella took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she withdrew the test from her purse. "I'm pregnant, Richard," she said, a nervous smile playing on her lips. "We're having a baby." The silence that followed was more biting than the wind whipping off the sound. Richard stared at the test, then at her, his blue eyes hardening like steel. "That's impossible," he said finally, his voice cold. "We always took precautions." Gabriella felt the first stab of panic. "Not always. Remember the cabin in October? Are you sure it's mine?" The question sliced through her like a physical blow. She stepped back, wounded. "How can you ask that? You know there's no one else." Richard ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, irritation replacing his usual composure. "Look, Gabriella, you're a beautiful girl. We've had fun, but I need to be honest with you." The word girl landed like another blow. After 2 years, countless intimate conversations, sharing hopes and dreams, she was still just a girl to him. "You're just a waitress without a formal education," he continued, each word more devastating than the last. "You could never be enough for my family or for Wall Street. A mixed-race baby would ruin my reputation." Gabriella felt the world tilting beneath her feet. "What are you saying?" Richard opened his Italian leather wallet and withdrew a checkbook. He wrote quickly, the scratching of his pen against paper the only sound besides the crashing waves. "This should solve the problem," he said, extending the check toward her. "Use it to take care of this." Gabriella stared at the check, unable to comprehend what was happening. "You think you can buy your child? Pay me to eliminate our baby?" "Be realistic," Richard sighed impatiently. "What do you have to offer a child? A tiny apartment and double shifts serving coffee? I'm about to close a billion-dollar merger. I can't have this kind of complication." Each word hammered another nail into the coffin of her dreams, of her belief in him. "You're a burden I've carried for 2 years, he continued, his face hardening. "Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of." With that, Richard dropped the check at her feet, turned, and walked back toward his silver Mercedes without a backward glance. Gabriella stood frozen, watching the man she loved abandon her as easily as discarding an empty coffee cup. When she could finally move, she bent down and picked up the check from the wet sidewalk. The amount written on it could have paid for her entire education several times over. For one brief moment, practical considerations flickered through her mind. The hardships ahead, the struggle of single motherhood, the dreams she might have to defer. Then, with deliberate slowness, she tore the check into pieces. The wind caught the fragments, carrying them over the railing and into the dark waters below. The following months were a nightmare of survival. Morning sickness made her restaurant work impossible to hide, and when her uniform could no longer disguise her growing belly, she lost her job. Her small apartment became unaffordable, forcing her to rent a room even smaller, shared with another immigrant woman who worked nights. Gabriella found work at a recycling plant, sorting electronic waste, much of it, ironically, from companies like Bennett Enterprises. The chemicals made her worry for her baby, but she had no choice. At night, while feeling her child move within her, she obsessively studied second-hand engineering and programming books purchased for pennies. An idea was forming in her mind, a technology for cleaning oceans using self-sustaining filtration systems. The electronic waste she sorted during the day fueled her rudimentary prototypes at night. Marcus Johnson was born in July of 2009, a healthy boy with the same penetrating eyes as his father, but with his mother's unshakable determination. 2 weeks after giving birth, Gabriella was back at the factory, the baby wrapped in an improvised sling. At night, while her son slept, she completed her application for a scholarship to the University of Washington. "One day, my son," she whispered to the sleeping baby, "I'll show that man we didn't need him to be extraordinary. When you grow up, you'll see your mother change the world, not because I want revenge, but because I deserve so much more than what he believed I was worth." While the waves swallowed the fragments of the check, Gabriella couldn't imagine that those same waters would inspire the technology that, in 15 years, would make her more powerful than the entire Bennett empire. The fragments of Richard's check drifted across the dark waters of Puget Sound, disappearing beneath the choppy surface as Gabriella watched, her hands still trembling from the confrontation. The wind whipped her hair across her tear-streaked face, but she made no move to brush it away. The physical pain of rejection was settling in her chest, a crushing weight that made it difficult to breathe. "Miss, are you okay?" A concerned dock worker approached, eyeing her cautiously. Gabriella straightened her shoulders, wiping her face quickly. "I'm fine," she lied, her accent thickening with emotion. "Just needed some air." As she walked away from the pier, one hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the same determination that had brought her from Brazil to America, from poverty to possibility. Richard Bennett may have rejected them both, but Gabriella Johnson had survived worse odds. 3 months later, Gabriella stood before the mirror in the employee bathroom at Pike Place Market, struggling to button her uniform shirt over her growing belly. No amount of creative layering could hide the evidence any longer. Her fingers trembled as she gave up on the bottom buttons, tucking the shirt as best she could into her black pants. Mr. Harmon, the restaurant manager, was waiting when she emerged. His eyes immediately went to her midsection, his expression hardening. "My office, Gabriella. Now." She followed him silently, already knowing what was coming. "I've been getting complaints," he began without preamble once the door closed. "Customers are uncomfortable with your condition." "My pregnancy," Gabriella corrected, refusing to allow him to dehumanize her child. "Whatever you want to call it, your uniform doesn't fit, and this isn't the image we want to present." He slid a final paycheck across the desk. "Consider today your last shift." Gabriella took the check, noting with bitter irony that the amount, 2 weeks' wages, was a fraction of what Richard had offered her to solve the problem. But unlike that blood money, this she had earned. "I've been your most reliable server for 3 years, she said quietly. "And now you're an unwed pregnant immigrant, not exactly Pike Place material." Mr. Harmon's voice held no malice, just business calculation. "You understand." She did understand. The world saw her value decreasing with each inch her belly expanded. 1 week later, Gabriella stood in her bare apartment, surrounded by the few possessions she hadn't sold or pawned. The landlord had been clear. Without proof of income, she couldn't renew her lease. A text message from Maria, another Brazilian immigrant she'd met at English classes, offered a temporary solution, a shared room in Rainier Beach, Far from the city center but within her drastically reduced budget. The room was smaller than her former bedroom, barely fitting a twin mattress and a small dresser. Maria worked night shifts at a hospital laundry so they could share the bed in alternating schedules. The building smelled of mildew and cooking grease, and distant arguments in multiple languages created a constant soundtrack of hardship. "It's not much," Maria apologized, helping Gabriella arrange her few possessions. "It's shelter," Gabriella replied pragmatically. "And right now, that's what matters most." Finding work proved nearly impossible. Each interview ended the same way: awkward glances at her growing stomach, promises to call that never materialized. By her 6th month, desperate and with savings nearly depleted, Gabriella accepted a position at Green Tech Recycling, a factory that processed electronic waste. Her first day was a shock to the system. The warehouse was vast, poorly ventilated, and filled with the acrid smell of chemicals and burning plastic. Workers sorted through mountains of discarded computers, phones, and circuit boards, separating valuable components from toxic waste. "Gloves and mask at all times," instructed Fatima, the shift supervisor, handing Gabriella protective gear. "Pregnant or not, same rules apply. You get 2 15-minute breaks and 30 minutes for lunch. Bathroom visits count against your break time." Gabriella nodded, pulling on the heavy gloves. Her station was a conveyor belt of electronic components, each to be sorted into appropriate bins. The pace was relentless, the work mind-numbing. By lunch, her back ached fiercely, and her feet had swollen against the confines of her shoes. During her break, she noticed something that made her pause: a large bin filled with discarded parts labeled Bennett Enterprises. The irony wasn't lost on her. The company that had once welcomed her as Richard's secret companion was now unwittingly providing her livelihood through its garbage. That evening, ignoring the pain in her body, Gabriella examined several small circuit boards she'd been permitted to take, damaged goods destined for the incinerator. An idea had been forming in her mind for months, a way to combine her passion for environmental science with practical engineering. These discarded components might be worthless to Bennett Enterprises, but to her, they represented possibility. The shared room gradually transformed during the evenings. While Maria slept before her night shift, Gabriella worked quietly at a small folding table, salvaging components, sketching designs for water filtration systems, and devouring second-hand textbooks on environmental engineering and programming. One night, halfway through her 8th month, Gabriella sat up abruptly, awakened by a particularly strong kick from her baby. Rubbing her belly soothingly, she reached for her notebook and quickly sketched a new concept: a self-regulating filtration system that could process microplastics using minimal energy. "You're going to be an engineer like your mom," she whispered to her unborn child. "We'll show them all what we're capable of." Marcus Johnson entered the world on a sweltering July day in 2009. The delivery was difficult. 18 hours of labor in a public hospital, no family beside her, only a kindly nurse who held her hand during the final pushes. When they placed him on her chest, tiny and red-faced but remarkably calm, Gabriella felt a rush of love so intense it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "He has his father's eyes," the nurse commented, admiring the baby's striking blue gaze. Gabriella looked down at her son, seeing Richard's features blended with her own. "He has my eyes now," she replied firmly. "Everything he has is mine to give him." 2 weeks later, despite the doctor's recommendation for 6 weeks of recovery, Gabriella wrapped Marcus in a makeshift sling fashioned from a bedsheet and returned to the recycling plant. She had no choice. Her meager savings were depleted, and Maria, though kind, couldn't support them both. The supervisor's eyes widened when she saw Gabriella approaching with the infant secured against her chest. "You can't bring a baby in here," Fatima said immediately. "It's against regulations. There are chemicals, heavy machinery." "Then you'll have to fire me," Gabriella interrupted calmly. "I have no child care, no family, and rent due next week. He stays with me, or we both go." A tense silence followed. Several workers paused to watch the standoff, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Finally, Fatima sighed. "Keep him in the sling. Stay at the testing station. It's farthest from the chemical processing. If anyone from management comes, hide him, or you're both out." The days fell into an exhausting rhythm. Gabriella worked 10-hour shifts with Marcus strapped to her chest, feeding him during breaks, changing him in the restroom. At night, while he slept, she continued her studies and experiments, often falling asleep over her books, waking only when Marcus cried for his midnight feeding. Despite the crushing fatigue, Gabriella's mind remained sharp, focused on the future. She refined her filtration system concept, using parts salvaged from the recycling plant to build crude prototypes. Testing them in the sink of their shared bathroom, she discovered promising results. Her design could filter particulates more efficiently than existing systems she'd researched. One evening, while testing her latest prototype, Gabriella had a breakthrough. Watching water spiral down the drain, she realized the natural vortex could enhance filtration while reducing energy requirements. Excited, she sketched the new design, adding calculations in the margins. "See this, Marcus?" she whispered to her sleeping 4-month-old. "This could change everything for us." The next day, during her lunch break, Gabriella noticed a flyer posted on the community board. University of Washington Scholarship Program for Non-Traditional Students. The deadline was just 2 weeks away, requiring transcripts from Brazil, letters of recommendation, and a personal statement. For the next 14 days, Gabriella barely slept. She contacted her former school in Brazil, drafted her essay during breaks at work, and approached her old high school English teacher for a recommendation. The application fee, $75, required selling the only luxury item she had kept, a silver watch Richard had given her on their first anniversary. The night before the deadline, disaster struck. Her arranged babysitter canceled, leaving Gabriella with no way to deliver her application to the university administration office before the 5 p.m. cutoff. Determined, she bundled Marcus against the October chill and boarded 3 separate buses to reach the university campus. Rain pounded mercilessly as she navigated the unfamiliar grounds, protecting her application in a plastic bag while keeping Marcus dry beneath her jacket. With 10 minutes to spare, soaking wet and breathless, she located the admissions office. The secretary looked up in surprise as Gabriella entered, water pooling at her feet, a baby clutched protectively against her chest. "Application for the non-traditional student scholarship," Gabriella explained, carefully extracting the dry envelope from inside her jacket. The woman accepted it with a bemused expression. "Deadline's deadline. You made it." On the long bus ride home, as Marcus slept against her, Gabriella allowed herself a small moment of hope. Education had always been her path to a better life. First in Brazil, now here. With a degree, she could transform her crude prototypes into real technology, her dreams into reality. Back in their tiny room, Gabriella photographed Marcus with her cheap phone camera. The image was grainy but clear enough to show his intelligent eyes, so like his father's yet filled with a warmth Richards had never possessed. She taped the photo beside her desk, a reminder of why every sacrifice was worthwhile. "One day, my son," she whispered, kissing his forehead as he slept, "I'll show that man that we didn't need him to be extraordinary. When you grow up, you'll see your mother change the world, not because I want revenge, but because I deserve much more than what he believed I was worth." As she sealed the envelope for her scholarship application, Gabriella couldn't possibly know that this simple act would initiate the trajectory that would one day bring her back into Richard Bennett's world, not as a supplicant, but as a conqueror. The envelope containing Gabriella's scholarship application seemed to whisper possibilities as she slipped it under her second-hand textbooks. For 3 months, silence stretched like an endless winter. She checked her email obsessively at the public library, Marcus balanced on her lap as she refreshed the screen. December brought holiday decorations to Seattle's streets, but Gabriella could barely afford to heat their tiny room, much less celebrate. Then, on a particularly gray January morning, the notification appeared. Heart racing, she clicked on the unread message from the University of Washington. "Dear Ms. Johnson, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for our full scholarship program for non-traditional students." Gabriella read the words 3 times, unable to believe that after months of desperation, fortune had finally smiled upon her. A sound between a sob and a laugh escaped her lips, causing Marcus to look up from his makeshift playmat on the library floor. "We did it, mio figlio," she whispered, lifting him into her arms. "Mommy's going to university." The reality of this new opportunity presented its own challenges. Classes would begin in 3 weeks, requiring Gabriella to find affordable childcare, adjust her work schedule, and somehow prepare herself to re-enter academic life after years away from formal education. Through a community center, she connected with Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly Salvadoran woman who watched children in her home for a modest fee. Her apartment was only a short bus ride from campus, and she immediately took to Marcus, cooing at him in Spanish. "He will be safe with me, mija," she assured Gabriella. "You focus on your studies." The first day of classes arrived with snowflakes drifting from a pale February sky. Gabriella had spent her last remaining dollars on a used laptop and a single professional outfit, black pants and a navy blazer from a thrift store. Standing at the entrance to the environmental engineering building, she watched students stream past, most younger, wearing expensive outdoor gear, carrying sleek computers in designer backpacks. A knot formed in her throat as she clutched her canvas bag containing a second-hand textbook with another student's highlighter marks and notes defacing the margins. For a moment, Richard's cruel words echoed in her mind. "You're just a waitress without a formal education." Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and walked through the doors. The lecture hall for advanced environmental systems was intimidating. Stadium seating filled with at least 100 students. Gabriella chose a seat near the back, trying to remain inconspicuous as she removed her notebook and carefully examined the syllabus she'd printed at the library. "Is this seat taken?" asked a young woman with a purple streak in her hair, gesturing to the chair beside Gabriella. "No, please," Gabriella replied, moving her bag. "I'm Zoe," the student offered with an easy smile. "Are you new? I don't remember seeing you last semester." Gabriella: "Yes, I just transferred." The half-truth was easier than explaining her complicated journey. As Professor Wilson began his lecture on water purification systems, Gabriella leaned forward, entirely focused. The theories he described aligned with concepts she'd been teaching herself, validating her self-directed studies. When he mentioned filtration challenges for microplastics, she found herself nodding along, having encountered those very problems in her makeshift experiments. "Any questions before we move on?" Professor Wilson asked, scanning the room. Before she could second-guess herself, Gabriella raised her hand. "Yes, in the back?" "Have you considered vortex-assisted filtration?" she asked, her accent thickening slightly with nervousness. "In my experience, from what I've read, centrifugal force could enhance separation of particles below 5 millimeters while reducing energy requirements." A silence fell over the lecture hall as students turned to look at her. Professor Wilson regarded her with surprise. "That's an interesting application of fluid dynamics," he said finally. "Are you familiar with Takahashi's work in Tokyo?" "Not directly," Gabriella admitted, "but I've experimented with similar principles using modified recycled components." As class ended, Professor Wilson approached her. "Ms. Johnson, Gabriella Johnson." That was an insightful comment. Most undergraduates don't think about practical applications until their senior projects. "Where did you study previously?" Gabriella hesitated. "I've been self-teaching while working at Green Tech Recycling. This is my first formal education in engineering." His eyebrows rose. "Impressive. If you're interested, I host an open lab on Thursday evenings for students working on independent projects. That Thursday marked the beginning of a new chapter. While other students presented theoretical designs, Gabriella brought her crude prototype built from salvaged electronics. Despite its unpolished appearance, the function was undeniable. It filtered water more efficiently than standard models, using principles the professor himself hadn't fully explored. Balancing university life with motherhood proved brutally difficult. Gabriella arranged her classes during Mrs. Rodriguez's available hours, worked weekend shifts at the recycling plant, and studied late into the night after putting Marcus to bed. Some mornings, she dozed off during lectures, jerking awake when her chin touched her chest. One night, after a particularly challenging fluid dynamics exam, Gabriella was still in the engineering building library at 2 a.m, head drooping over her textbook. The sound of a door opening startled her awake. "Mrs. Johnson?" Professor Wilson stood in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. "It's well past midnight." "I'm sorry," she said quickly, gathering her papers. "I lost track of time." Instead of reprimanding her, he pulled up a chair. "You don't need to apologize for studying." His eyes fell on her open notebook, filled with detailed sketches of filtration systems. "May I?" Gabriella nodded, watching nervously as he examined her work. "These are remarkable," he said finally. "You've approached the vortex filtration from an entirely novel angle." He looked up at her, curiosity evident. "Why oceanic applications specifically?" She hesitated before answering. "The oceans are dying from our waste, yet most cleanup technologies are prohibitively expensive or inefficient. I believe we can do better." "We," he repeated, smiling slightly. "You speak like someone on a mission." Gabriella thought of Marcus, of the world he would inherit. "I am." Spring arrived, bringing longer days and new challenges. Marcus took his first steps in the empty corridors of the engineering building one evening while Gabriella worked on a project. His wobbly progress across the polished floor drew applause from a passing security guard, who thereafter always greeted the little engineer with a high five. In the materials science lab, Gabriella had her breakthrough. Combining biodegradable polymers with recycled electronic components, she created a filtration membrane that could capture particles as small as 1 micron while being completely environmentally safe. "This contradicts conventional approaches," challenged Dr. Yamamoto, her chemistry professor, during a demonstration. "The conventions are the problem," Gabriella replied confidently. "Traditional filtration methods either consume too much energy or create secondary waste. This design eliminates both issues." As final projects approached, Gabriella was invited to join a study group by Zoe and several other classmates who had noticed her insightful contributions in class. Their first meeting was scheduled at a coffee shop near campus, a simple location that presented a complex problem for Gabriella, who couldn't afford a babysitter outside her class hours. Reluctantly, she brought Marcus along, prepared for rejection. To her surprise, her classmates welcomed the toddler, taking turns entertaining him while they worked. "Your son is adorable," said Tyler, a lanky engineering student who had fashioned a toy from napkins and straws. "Thank you," Gabriella replied, relief evident in her voice. "Must be nice getting that diversity scholarship while some of us had to maintain a 4.0, muttered Blake, the group's most privileged member, just loud enough to be heard. The table fell silent. Gabriella felt heat rising to her cheeks, but instead of showing anger, she straightened in her seat. "Actually, Blake, the non-traditional student scholarship requires maintaining a 3.8 GPA while taking a full course load," she said evenly. "And did you know that ineffective filtration systems allow approximately 8 million metric tons of plastic to enter our oceans annually? That's equivalent to dumping a garbage truck of plastic into the ocean every minute. Perhaps diversity of perspective is exactly what's needed to solve problems that conventional thinking hasn't addressed." Blake had no response, and the others exchanged impressed glances. From that day forward, Gabriella was no longer viewed as an outsider but as a valuable contributor with unique insights. As the semester progressed, her prototype evolved. Nights in Professor Wilson's garage workspace became a regular occurrence, with Marcus sleeping in a sleeping bag while Gabriella soldered components and coded simple programs to regulate the filtration process. "You should patent this," Professor Wilson advised one evening, watching her adjust the flow regulators. "This could be commercially viable." Gabriella looked up from her work, the possibility never having occurred to her. "I wouldn't know where to begin. The university has resources. I'd be happy to introduce you to someone in the technology transfer office." The spring semester culminated in the engineering department's annual innovation showcase. Students presented their projects to faculty, industry representatives, and potential investors. Gabriella's hands trembled as she made final adjustments to her ocean filtration model, constructed partially from recycled electronics she'd collected from green tech. Her station was modest compared to others. No fancy displays or printed materials, just the working prototype and her detailed notes. As demonstrations began, Gabriella feared being overlooked among more polished presentations. But something unexpected happened. The efficiency of her system, showing real-time filtration with 70% greater effectiveness than conventional methods, drew attention. A small crowd gathered, asking questions about applications, scalability, and energy consumption. Among the observers was Dr. James Carter, a renowned professor of environmental technology who had recently returned from leading an oceanic research expedition. He watched silently as Gabriella explained her design to others, noting how she discussed complex engineering principles with remarkable clarity. When the crowd thinned, he approached her station. "Your design contradicts several established filtration principles," he began without introduction. Gabriella met his gaze steadily. "Yes, because those principles were established when energy consumption wasn't considered a critical factor. My system prioritizes efficiency and environmental impact equally. And the components? They appear to be unconventional." "Recycled electronics," she confirmed, proving that solutions don't require entirely new production, contributing to further waste. Dr. Carter studied the prototype more closely, testing the interface and examining the filtration medium. Finally, he looked up with newfound respect. "You've just revolutionized the concept of oceanic cleaning," he said, extending his hand. "I'm James Carter, Environmental Technology. I want to be your mentor." As they discussed possibilities for developing her technology further, Gabriella felt a sense of validation she'd never experienced before. This wasn't just academic success, it was the first step toward the future she envisioned, a future where her son would never need to question his worth. What none of the impressed professors could suspect was that this humble prototype made from recycled waste would become, in less than a decade, the technological foundation of a billion-dollar company that would forever change the balance of power between Gabriella and the man who had discarded her. 3 years transformed Gabriella Johnson's life in ways she once thought impossible. The shy Brazilian immigrant who had once trembled while serving champagne to executives was now a respected final-year engineering student, her name known throughout the environmental sciences department for her innovative approach to oceanic filtration. The tiny room she had shared with Maria was replaced by a modest one-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood, where Marcus had his own corner filled with second-hand books and educational toys. On a crisp autumn morning, Gabriella sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers, while Dr. James Carter, now her academic mentor and ardent supporter, reviewed her latest refinements to the filtration system. "The energy efficiency ratios are remarkable," he said, tapping her calculations. "You've reduced power requirements by another 12% while increasing filtration capacity." Gabriella nodded, pouring more coffee into his mug. "The breakthrough came when I modified the internal flow patterns to create multiple microvortices instead of a single central one." "Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant." Dr. Carter's enthusiasm was genuine. Over the past 2 years, he had watched Gabriella evolve from a promising student with raw ideas to a sophisticated engineer whose innovations challenged established principles. From the bedroom doorway came the sound of small feet padding across the floor. Marcus, now 5 years old, emerged clutching a notebook filled with childish drawings of what appeared to be mechanical devices. "Good morning, Dr. Carter," he said with surprising formality for a child his age. "I improved Mom's filtration design." Dr. Carter smiled, extending his hand for the notebook. "Let's see what you've got, young man." Marcus handed over his drawings with the seriousness of a doctoral candidate submitting a thesis. The pages contained crayon sketches of Gabriella's device with additional components that, despite their childish execution, demonstrated remarkable spatial understanding. "See, if you put solar panels here," Marcus pointed to the top of the device, "it can work even when there's no power." Dr. Carter exchanged an impressed look with Gabriella. "Your son has quite an engineering mind for a 5-year-old. He falls asleep to fluid dynamics equations instead of bedtime stories," Gabriella replied, ruffling Marcus's dark curls affectionately. Though his features increasingly resembled Richard's with each passing year, his curiosity and compassion were entirely his own, or perhaps, she sometimes thought, reflections of what Richard might have been before wealth and privilege hardened him. As Marcus settled at the table with his cereal, Dr. Carter lowered his voice. "Have you considered the Startup Incubator Program? Applications close next week." Gabriella hesitated. The university's prestigious incubator program offered space, initial funding, and mentorship to promising student innovations. It was highly competitive, with hundreds of applicants vying for just 10 spots each year. "I'm not sure I'd qualify," she admitted. "Most accepted projects come from graduate students or research teams." "Your technology is more advanced than half the doctoral projects I've supervised," Dr. Carter insisted. "The worst they can say is no." That evening, after tucking Marcus into bed, Gabriella sat at her computer staring at the incubator program application. The cursor blinked accusingly on the screen as doubt crept in. Who was she to compete with teams of privileged students who'd had every advantage? The memory of Richard's voice slithered into her mind. "You're just a waitress without a formal education." With sudden determination, she began typing. By midnight, her application was complete. A comprehensive proposal for scalable oceanic filtration technology, including preliminary test results and market analysis. She clicked submit before fear could stop her, then collapsed into bed, exhausted but proud. 2 weeks later, the rejection email arrived while she was preparing Marcus's lunch. "Thank you for your application to the UW Startup Incubator Program. While your project shows promise, we regret to inform you that it lacks the established commercial viability and team experience we require for this competitive program." Disappointment washed over her, but only briefly. Gabriella Johnson had faced far worse rejection and survived. This was merely another obstacle to overcome. The next morning, she appeared unannounced at the office of Dr. Thomas Rivera, director of the incubator program. "Ms. Johnson," his assistant said nervously, "Dr. Rivera doesn't take unscheduled appointments." "I'll wait," Gabriella replied calmly, taking a seat in the reception area. 3 hours later, when Dr. Rivera emerged between meetings, she stood to intercept him. "Dr. Rivera, I need 5 minutes to change your perception of my project." The director looked annoyed, then curious. "You're the ocean filtration applicant." "Yes, and I believe your evaluation overlooked key aspects of commercial viability." Perhaps it was her confidence or maybe the determination in her eyes, but something made him pause. "You have a presentation next week, Tuesday, 4 o'clock, impress us." Gabriella spent the next 6 days refining her presentation, practicing until Marcus could recite parts of it from memory. Every detail was meticulously planned, except for childcare. The night before her presentation, Mrs. Rodriguez called with devastating news. Her arthritis had flared up, making it impossible to watch Marcus. "I'm sorry, mija. I can barely move my hands today." Panic rose in Gabriella's throat. Missing this opportunity wasn't an option, but bringing a 5-year-old to a professional presentation seemed equally disastrous. "I want to see Mommy be a scientist," Marcus declared when she explained the situation. "It's not appropriate, mio figlio. These are important people who make serious decisions." "I'll be good," he promised solemnly. "I won't say a word." With no alternatives, Gabriella dressed Marcus in his best clothes the next day, a button-up shirt and khaki pants purchased from a thrift store but carefully pressed. She coached him repeatedly. "Sit quietly, don't interrupt, draw in your notebook if you get bored." When they entered the auditorium where the incubator committee waited, Gabriella felt her confidence waver. 5 distinguished professors and 2 industry representatives sat at a long table, expressions ranging from neutral to openly disapproving at the sight of a child holding her hand. "Mrs. Johnson," Dr. Rivera frowned, "this isn't a daycare. We're evaluating serious business propositions." Gabriella straightened her shoulders. "I apologize for the unorthodox circumstance. My childcare arrangements fell through unexpectedly." She guided Marcus to a chair at the side of the room. "Please consider this a practical demonstration of the challenges faced by single-parent entrepreneurs, challenges that haven't prevented me from developing cutting-edge technology." This direct acknowledgement of her situation seemed to catch them off guard. Dr. Rivera nodded reluctantly. "You have 15 minutes. Gabriella launched into her presentation with practiced precision, explaining how her oceanic filtration system could remove microplastics more efficiently than existing technologies while operating on minimal energy. She demonstrated cost analyses, scalability models, and environmental impact projections. 10 minutes in, as she explained the power generation component, Marcus suddenly raised his hand. Gabriella froze, mortified. "Excuse me," he said politely when the committee members looked his way. "Mommy, you forgot to explain the energy feedback system." The room fell silent. Gabriella opened her mouth to apologize, but Marcus continued, standing and walking to her side. "The filters create resistance, which makes energy," he explained to the stunned committee, using simplified but accurate terminology. "That energy goes back into the system so it can run longer without outside power." Dr. Rivera leaned forward, addressing Marcus directly. "Young man, who taught you that?" Marcus smiled proudly. "My mom is the smartest person in the world. I watch her work every day." The committee members exchanged glances, some suppressing smiles, others openly impressed. Dr. Rivera studied Gabriella with newfound interest. "Mrs. Johnson, it seems your team makes a compelling case. We'll deliberate and inform you of our decision shortly." 3 days later, the acceptance email arrived. The Phoenix Rising Project, named for Gabriella's determination to rise from the ashes of her past, had been awarded incubator space and $50,000 in seed funding. "We did it!" Gabriella lifted Marcus into a twirling hug when she read the news. "We're going to build our filtration system for real." "Can I help design it?" Marcus asked eagerly. "You already have," she assured him, remembering how his innocent interruption had changed the committee's perception. The next week, Gabriella and Marcus stood before a small industrial garage that would become their workspace. The concrete floor was stained, the walls needed paint, and the lighting was inadequate. But to Gabriella, it represented possibility. Marcus looked around the empty space with curious eyes. "It's small, Mommy." Gabriella smiled, running her hand along a workbench that would soon hold the future she was building for them. "For now, figlio. For now." As summer approached, Gabriella graduated with honors while simultaneously developing her first commercial prototype. The incubator funding, while substantial, required careful management. Every component was scrutinized for cost and effectiveness, every hour of paid assistance maximized. Marcus became a fixture in the workshop, his kindergarten schedule arranged to allow him afternoons with Gabriella. He had his own desk made from a wooden crate, where he drew designs and assembled simple circuits under her supervision. Other startups in the incubator space initially raised eyebrows at the child's presence, but his precocious understanding of technical concepts soon earned their respect. By autumn, the first functional prototype was ready for testing. Larger than her university model and significantly more sophisticated, it demonstrated remarkable efficiency in controlled conditions. Dr. Carter arranged for a small demonstration tank at the university's Marine Science Center where potential investors could observe the system in action. "Nervous?" Dr. Carter asked as they prepared for the first investor demonstration. Gabriella adjusted the flow regulator, her movements precise despite her anxiety. Terrified, but also ready. The demonstration exceeded expectations. The prototype filtered contaminated water with impressive speed, extracting microplastics and chemical pollutants while consuming minimal energy. 2 angel investors expressed immediate interest, arranging follow-up meetings to discuss potential funding. That night, as Gabriella tucked Marcus into bed, he asked a question that caught her off guard. "Mommy, are we going to be rich now?" She sat on the edge of his bed, considering how to respond. "We're building something important, not just for us, but for the oceans and the planet. If we succeed, we'll have enough to live comfortably and help others. That's better than being rich." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Like superheroes, we'll save the oceans." "Exactly like superheroes," she agreed, kissing his forehead. Later, as she worked on refinements to the prototype's control system, Gabriella reflected on how far they had come. From the devastation of Richard's rejection to the cusp of creating something meaningful, the journey had shaped her in ways she never anticipated. The small garage that Gabriella had rented that day, for a sum that had almost made her reconsider, would one day be framed and preserved in the atrium of Phoenix Rising Technologies World Headquarters as a reminder of where everything began, and where Richard Bennett would one day beg for a meeting. The small garage space that had once seemed so imposing now felt cramped as Gabriella navigated between tables laden with prototypes, components, and testing equipment. 2 years had passed since the incubator program had awarded her the initial funding, and Phoenix Rising Technologies officially existed as more than just an idea. The $50,000 had been stretched to its absolute limit, supplemented by small consulting jobs Gabriella took on nights and weekends. In a corner of the garage, Marcus had fallen asleep on a makeshift bed of cushions and blankets, his 7-year-old frame curled around a well-worn engineering textbook. A lamp cast soft light over his features, highlighting the increasing resemblance to Richard that sometimes caught Gabriella off guard. She gently removed the book from his grasp, marking his place with a scrap of paper covered in his surprisingly advanced equations. "He should be home in bed," observed Elijah, a graduate student who volunteered his programming expertise in exchange for research credit. "I know," Gabriella sighed, checking her watch, "but the babysitter canceled, and this component test couldn't wait." The latest prototype of her ocean filtration system sat submerged in a large tank, its performance metrics displaying on a nearby laptop. The numbers were promising but not yet revolutionary. After 2 years of refinement, Gabriella had developed a commercially viable product, but its efficiency still fell short of her ultimate vision. She collapsed into a chair, exhaustion washing over her. The funding was nearly depleted, and although she'd managed to build a working prototype that functioned better than most commercial alternatives, investors remained cautious. "Interesting technology, but what's your business experience?" they would ask, or "The market for environmental solutions is limited by government spending." The next morning, Gabriella checked her bank account on her phone while preparing Marcus's breakfast. The balance made her stomach tighten. Less than 2 weeks of operating expenses remained. Without new investment, Phoenix Rising would be forced to shut down before truly taking flight. "Is something wrong?" Marcus asked, his perceptive eyes catching the subtle shift in her expression. Gabriella forced a smile. "Just grown-up worries, mio figlio. Nothing for you to worry about." "Is it money?" he asked directly. "Tommy at school says startups always run out of money." Gabriella sometimes forgot how much her son absorbed from their surroundings. "We're facing challenges," she acknowledged, never believing in shielding him completely from reality. "But we'll find a solution." Marcus nodded solemnly. "We always do." Later that day, as Gabriella worked on cost reduction modifications to the prototype, a news alert flashed on her computer screen. Oil spill reported off Oregon coast. Moderate environmental impact expected. She clicked on the article, scanning the details. A cargo ship had struck rocks near Newport, Oregon, releasing thousands of gallons of fuel oil into coastal waters. Large environmental remediation companies were already mobilizing response teams. "This is it," Gabriella whispered, an idea forming rapidly. Her filtration system was designed precisely for this type of disaster, but on a larger scale than she had yet tested. It was a risk, but also potentially the perfect demonstration opportunity. She called Dr. Carter immediately. "James, have you seen the news about the Oregon spill?" "I was just about to call you," he replied. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking? If I can get my system to the site, demonstrate its effectiveness in real conditions." "It's a gamble," he cautioned. "Your prototype hasn't been field tested at that scale." "It's also our only chance," Gabriella countered. "The money's almost gone. Without a major demonstration or investor, Phoenix dies in 2 weeks." There was a pause. "What do you need from me?" "Your van, and maybe help convincing the university to let us borrow some additional equipment." Within hours, Gabriella had transformed into a whirlwind of activity. The most functional prototype was carefully disassembled and packed alongside testing equipment, tools, and spare parts. Marcus watched with wide-eyed excitement as his mother coordinated the impromptu expedition. "Can I come too?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Gabriella hesitated. Leaving him behind wasn't an option. Mrs. Rodriguez was visiting family in El Salvador, and there was no money for alternative childcare. "Yes, but you'll need to be my special assistant. This is serious business." Marcus nodded, immediately packing his engineering notebook and favorite scientific calculator, a birthday gift from Dr. Carter. By nightfall, they were on the road in Dr. Carter's aging van, the prototype secured in the back, Marcus sleeping peacefully in the passenger seat. Gabriella drove through the night, fueled by determination and gas station coffee. The 5-hour journey to the Oregon coast gave her time to rehearse what she would say to officials at the site, anticipating resistance and preparing counters to their objections. Dawn broke as they approached Newport, the sky painted in oranges and pinks that would have been beautiful if not for the circumstances. From the coastal highway they could see the damaged cargo vessel in the distance, surrounded by response boats. Helicopters circled overhead, and the beach was crowded with emergency vehicles and equipment. "Wake up, Marcus," Gabriella said softly. "We're here." The boy rubbed his eyes, immediately alert as he took in the scene. "Wow, it's a real emergency." "Yes, and we're going to help," she replied, though uncertainty crept into her voice as she observed the scale of the official response already underway. After parking at a public beach access point, Gabriella approached the police barricade, Marcus holding her hand tightly. A tired-looking officer held up his hand to stop them. "Areas closed to the public, ma'am. Environmental hazard." "I'm not public," Gabriella explained, presenting her university ID and business card. "I'm Gabriella Johnson, engineer and developer of an advanced filtration system designed specifically for marine pollution events. I believe I can help." The officer looked skeptical. "Ma'am, we have professional remediation teams with approved equipment already working. I can't let civilians into a hazardous area, especially with a child." Gabriella felt desperation rising. "Please, I just need to speak with whoever is coordinating the response. My technology could significantly improve the cleanup efficiency." "Mom can fix this," Marcus added earnestly. "Her system filters oil way better than regular methods." The officer's expression softened slightly at Marcus's confidence, but he shook his head. I don't have the authority to approve that. You'd need to speak with Incident Command, and they're extremely busy right now." As they were about to turn away, a Coast Guard officer approached, having overheard the exchange. His nameplate read, "Lieutenant Reyes." "What kind of system?" he asked directly. Hope surged through Gabriella. "A microfluidic filtration array with automated pollutant separation. It can process contaminated water at 5 times the rate of conventional skimmers while consuming a fraction of the energy." Lieutenant Reyes studied her for a moment, then Marcus. "And the boy?" "My son. I couldn't leave him behind." Something in her determined expression must have resonated with him. "Look, I can't authorize anything official, but there's a small cove about half a mile down that way." He pointed south. "It's outside the main containment area but still affected. I can give you 30 minutes to demonstrate your technology there. If it works, I'll bring it to the attention of my superiors." "Thank you," Gabriella breathed. "You won't regret this." With the lieutenant's help, they transported the prototype to the secluded cove. The water's surface was marred with rainbow sheens of oil, the rocks along the shoreline already blackened by the spill. Gabriella worked quickly, assembling the system while explaining each component to both Marcus and Lieutenant Reyes. "The principle is simple," she said, connecting the power supply. "Water is drawn through these intake valves, where a series of engineered microchannels separate different densities of material. Oil rises to collection chambers here, while filtered water returns to the environment through these outlets." When everything was ready, Gabriella took a deep breath and activated the system. At first, nothing seemed to happen, and she felt a moment of panic. Then, gradually, the intake began to pull contaminated water through the filtration array. The process was initially sluggish, but as internal mechanisms adjusted to the conditions, the flow increased steadily. "Is it working?" Lieutenant Reyes asked, skepticism evident in his voice. "Watch," Gabriella replied, pointing to the collection chamber that was already beginning to fill with separated oil. Within 15 minutes, the difference was visible to the naked eye. A clear zone of clean water had formed around the device, expanding outward as the system processed more volume. Lieutenant Reyes took photographs with his phone, expression shifting from doubt to genuine interest. "The filtration efficiency is approximately 87%, Gabriella explained, showing him the real-time data on her laptop. "And it's completely self-regulating. No need for constant adjustment or supervision." By the time their 30 minutes had elapsed, a small crowd had gathered. Other Coast Guard personnel, a local news reporter, and several environmental officials who had heard about the unofficial demonstration. "Who authorized this?" demanded a man in an expensive suit, clearly a senior official. Before Gabriella could respond, Lieutenant Reyes stepped forward. "I did, sir. I suggest you look at the results before making any judgments." The official's reprimand died on his lips as he observed the stark contrast between the treated area and the surrounding water. The reporter was already filming, capturing footage of the system in action while Gabriella explained the technology. "This is remarkable," admitted an environmental scientist who had been testing water samples. "The hydrocarbon levels in the treated water are well below regulatory limits. How is this not already in commercial use?" "We're a new company," Gabriella explained. "This is our first field demonstration." As word spread about the effectiveness of Phoenix Rising's technology, more officials arrived to witness the demonstration. By late afternoon, Gabriella found herself in an impromptu meeting on the beach, surrounded by environmental agencies, Coast Guard leadership, and local government representatives. "We can deploy more units within 72 hours, she promised, though she had no idea how she would fulfill that commitment with her limited resources. When the meeting concluded, an EPA official handed Gabriella a preliminary document. "It's not much, but we want to contract your system for the continued cleanup of this area. Once we've verified sustained performance, we can discuss expanding to the main spill zone." Gabriella's hands trembled as she accepted the document. The initial payment figure, while modest by corporate standards, would save Phoenix Rising from imminent collapse and fund the production of additional units. That evening, as she and Marcus sat in their motel room sharing a pizza, Gabriella allowed herself to truly breathe for the first time in months. "We did it, mio figlio. This is just the beginning." Marcus grinned, tomato sauce on his chin. "I told the policeman you could fix it. Phoenix Rising is going to save all the oceans now." Gabriella smiled, thinking about how far they had come and how far they still needed to go. One step at a time. But yes, this is our mission now. The small government contract that saved Phoenix Rising from bankruptcy would be just the first of many, but the most significant would come 7 years later when the tanks of Bennett Petroleum, a recently acquired subsidiary of Richard's empire, would cause the greatest environmental disaster of the decade on the same coast. The small government contract that saved Phoenix Rising from bankruptcy was just the beginning of Gabriella's journey. 4 years had transformed both her company and her life beyond recognition. The modest garage where she had first assembled her prototype had given way to a sleek office building near the Seattle waterfront, its glass facade adorned with the Phoenix Rising logo, a stylized bird emerging from ocean waves. On a bright spring morning, Gabriella stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, watching ferries cross Elliott Bay while speaking on a conference call with environmental officials from Singapore. "Yes, the deployment timeline is entirely feasible," she assured them. "Our systems have been successfully operating in similar conditions off the coast of Thailand for the past 8 months. As she concluded the call, her assistant knocked softly before entering. "The team is ready for the strategy meeting whenever you are." Gabriella nodded, gathering her tablet. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll be right there." The conference room buzzed with energy as Gabriella entered. 5 engineers, her core team of brilliant minds who had believed in her vision enough to join a fledgling startup, were engaged in animated discussion around a holographic display of their newest filtration system. "The third-generation prototype is exceeding expectations," reported Dr. Wei Chen, her lead engineer. "Filtration efficiency has improved by 22% while power consumption dropped by nearly a third." "Excellent," Gabriella replied, taking her seat at the head of the table. "The Australian government contract depends on those efficiency metrics." The success in Oregon had been a catalyst, attracting attention from environmental agencies nationwide. When footage of Phoenix Rising's technology went viral in environmental circles, venture capitalists finally began to take notice. A strategic round of funding had allowed Gabriella to expand operations, hire a small but talented team, and refine her technology into a commercially viable product line. "The marketing materials for the PR3000 series are ready for approval," said Tomas, her newly hired communications director. "We've emphasized the zero-waste manufacturing process as you requested." Gabriella reviewed the materials on her tablet, nodding approval. "Perfect. I want sustainability at the forefront of everything we do, from our technology to how we build it." Later that afternoon, Gabriella met with a component manufacturer in the company's small conference room. The man across the table slid over a proposal with competitive pricing but questionable materials. "These plastics would reduce production costs by almost 20%, he explained. Gabriella pushed the document back. "We need components that are 100% sustainable, no exceptions. Our mission is to clean the oceans, not contribute to their pollution through our supply chain." The manufacturer looked disappointed but not surprised. Phoenix Rising's commitment to ethical manufacturing had become legendary in the industry, even when it meant higher costs and thinner margins. "I'll revise the proposal with fully biodegradable alternatives," he conceded. That evening, the entire team gathered around a large table in the main workspace. Sarah uncorked a bottle of champagne as Gabriella carefully removed a sleek device from a protective case, the first production model of their commercial filtration system. "To the PR3000, Gabriella toasted, raising her glass, "and to all of you who made it possible." The celebration was modest but meaningful, a milestone that represented years of perseverance. As the team chatted excitedly about upcoming deployments, Gabriella's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Marcus won! First place!" A smile spread across her face. Marcus, now 11, had entered the Washington State Science Fair with an adaptation of his mother's technology designed for freshwater river systems. While Gabriella had offered guidance, the core innovation, using naturally occurring river currents to power the filtration process, had been entirely his idea. "Everything okay?" Dr. Chen asked, noting her distraction. "More than okay," Gabriella beamed. "My son just won the state science fair." The following weekend, Gabriella sat in the audience of the University of Washington's lecture hall, watching Marcus accept his award. The confidence with which he explained his river filtration system to judges and audience members belied his age. With each passing year, he grew more comfortable in the spotlight, his natural charisma blending with genuine intellectual curiosity. "The contamination of our waterways isn't just an environmental issue, it's a social justice issue," Marcus explained to the audience. "Low-income communities are disproportionately affected by polluted rivers. My system is designed to be deployable in areas without reliable power infrastructure." Pride swelled in Gabriella's chest as she watched her son field complex technical questions with the poise of someone twice his age. Though his features increasingly resembled Richard's, his compassion and social awareness were qualities she had nurtured in him from the beginning. After the ceremony, as they walked to their car, no longer a borrowed vehicle but a modest electric sedan purchased with Phoenix Rising's first profits, Marcus clutched his trophy excitedly. "Mom, Professor Whitman from MIT was there. He said my design showed remarkable innovation for someone so young." "That's wonderful, mio figlio," Gabriella replied, though her attention was momentarily captured by an email notification on her phone. The subject line read, "Invitation to Keynote, Global Environmental Technologies Conference, New York." Her finger hovered over the notification. New York represented a significant step onto the national stage. The conference was covered by major financial and technology publications, attended by industry leaders and potential investors. That night, after Marcus was asleep, Gabriella opened the invitation on her laptop. The email was effusive in its praise. "Your groundbreaking work in oceanic remediation represents exactly the kind of innovation our conference aims to highlight. We would be honored to have you discuss the future of environmental conservation technology as our keynote speaker." 2 months later, Gabriella stood in front of her closet, considering her limited options for professional attire. Despite Phoenix Rising's growing success, she still lived modestly, reinvesting most profits back into the company. "You need something more impressive than these," Marcus observed, fingering the sleeve of her usual blazer. "You're going to be the most important speaker there." "The technology should speak for itself," she replied, though she knew he was right. "You need to look like a CEO, not a scientist," Marcus insisted with the directness of a preteen. The next day, Gabriella reluctantly visited a designer boutique in downtown Seattle, investing in her first truly high-quality business attire. The journey to New York marked another first, their maiden voyage on a commercial airplane rather than the exhausting cross-country drives they had previously endured for business meetings. As they approached the luxury hotel where the conference was being held, Gabriella felt a momentary pang of insecurity. Just 7 years earlier, she had been sorting electronic waste in a poorly ventilated warehouse, pregnant and abandoned. The hotel's gleaming lobby was intimidating in its opulence. As they approached the reception desk, Gabriella noticed the staff's evaluating glances, taking in her modest luggage and Marcus's presence, clearly making assumptions. "Checking in," she said, presenting her ID. "Gabriella Johnson. I'm the keynote speaker for the Environmental Technologies Conference." The receptionist's demeanor transformed instantly. "Ms. Johnson, we've been expecting you. We've upgraded you to one of our executive suites, and I've taken the liberty of arranging VIP access to all conference facilities for both you and your son." The suite was larger than their entire apartment, with panoramic views of Manhattan that left Marcus speechless. While he explored the rooms in wonder, Gabriella reviewed her presentation one final time, refining key points about Phoenix Rising's vision for global oceanic remediation. The following morning, Gabriella delivered her address to a packed auditorium. Her presentation was technical yet accessible, passionate yet data-driven. She spoke without notes, moving confidently across the stage as she explained how Phoenix Rising's technology could transform marine conservation efforts worldwide. "The oceans are the lifeblood of our planet," she concluded. "And technology isn't just about creating the future, it's about preserving what we cannot afford to lose." The standing ovation that followed was thunderous. As attendees lined up to speak with her afterward, Gabriella noticed an older gentleman watching from a distance, his expression thoughtful. He approached when the crowd had thinned. "Ms. Johnson, I'm Daniel Harrington," he introduced himself. "I lead Bluestone Ventures." Gabriella recognized the name immediately. One of the most respected investment firms focused on environmental technologies. "Your presentation was exceptional," he continued. "But even more impressive is what you've accomplished with such limited resources. Your technology isn't just revolutionary, it's necessary." That evening, Harrington invited Gabriella and Marcus to dinner at an exclusive restaurant overlooking Central Park. As they discussed the future of environmental remediation, Marcus occasionally joined the conversation, displaying his remarkable understanding of both the technology and its applications. "The problem with current desalination methods," Marcus noted during a discussion of water scarcity, "is the energy inefficiency and the hypersaline discharge that damages marine ecosystems." Harrington looked impressed, then slightly embarrassed. "You're absolutely right. I misstated the conversion ratio earlier." Gabriella watched the exchange with quiet pride. Her son was growing into a young man who could hold his own in conversations with industry leaders, yet remained humble and eager to learn. As dessert arrived, Harrington placed a folder on the table. "I'd like to make you an offer, Ms. Johnson. $15 million for global expansion with a single condition. You maintain control of the company and remain as CEO." Gabriella's heart raced. This was the opportunity Phoenix Rising needed to scale beyond regional projects to truly global impact. "Most investors want to replace founders with experienced management," she observed cautiously. "Most investors are fools," Harrington replied. "Your vision and determination are what built this company. I'm investing in you as much as your technology." 3 days later, in Harrington's Manhattan office, Gabriella signed the investment agreement. Her hand trembled slightly as she completed the signature that would transform Phoenix Rising from a promising startup into a global environmental technology company. "This is just the beginning of our mission," she said, handing the pen back to Harrington. On the flight home, Marcus fell asleep against her shoulder while Gabriella stared out at the clouds below, reflecting on their journey. From the devastation of Richard's rejection had come a strength she never knew she possessed. Each obstacle had forced her to become more resilient, more innovative, more determined to succeed not just for herself, but for Marcus and for the planet they were working to protect. What she couldn't know was that across the country, Richard Bennett was about to come face to face with her success in an unexpected way. In his Seattle penthouse, he sat in his leather armchair, sipping 30-year-old Macallan while half-watching a CNBC segment on emerging technologies. When the announcer mentioned revolutionary oceanic cleaning systems from Phoenix Rising Technologies, Richard glanced up disinterestedly, until the camera cut to Gabriella delivering her keynote address in New York. The whiskey glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor as he recognized the waitress without education he had abandoned pregnant 6 years earlier. The CNBC segment continued as Richard Bennett sat frozen in his leather armchair, whiskey soaking into the imported hardwood floor beneath his feet. On screen, Gabriella Johnson, the woman he had once dismissed as a burden, stood confidently before a crowd of industry elites, explaining revolutionary technology that was apparently changing the world. Phoenix Rising Technologies has secured contracts with 17 countries for coastal cleanup initiatives. The reporter explained over footage of sleek filtration systems being deployed from research vessels. Their proprietary technology has demonstrated efficiency rates nearly 3 times higher than competitors, while operating at a fraction of the cost. Richard reached for the remote with a trembling hand, increasing the volume. Behind this remarkable success story is Brazilian-American engineer Gabriela Johnson, who founded the company just 7 years ago. Starting with a small government contract following the Oregon coastal spill of 2016, Phoenix Rising has grown exponentially, now valued at approximately $2.3 billion after their latest funding round. The camera cut to Gabriela accepting an award, her once wild curls now elegantly styled, her posture radiating the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth. Beside her stood a boy, perhaps 11 or 12, with a familiar set to his jaw and unmistakable blue eyes that made Richard's chest tighten uncomfortably. "That's impossible," he whispered to the empty room. 3 years passed with the relentless momentum of a changing tide. The strategic investment from Bluestone Ventures had transformed Phoenix Rising from a promising startup into a global environmental technology leader. The company now occupied a 20-story sustainable building in downtown Seattle, its innovative architecture featuring living walls, rainwater collection systems, and energy-generating windows, a physical manifestation of Gabriela's commitment to environmental harmony. From her office on the top floor, Gabriela could see the exact pier where Richard had abandoned her 15 years earlier. Some days, she would pause briefly by the window, remembering the young woman who had stood there, tears freezing on her cheeks as she watched hope disappear. That memory, once painful, now served as a measure of how far she had come. On a crisp autumn morning, Gabriela reviewed quarterly reports with her executive team in the glass-walled conference room adjacent to her office. The wall-to-wall windows offered a panoramic view of Puget Sound, the same waters that had inspired her filtration technology. "Our market valuation has increased 27% since last quarter," reported Amir, her chief financial officer. "We're now at $4.8 billion, and analysts predict we'll cross the $5 billion threshold by year-end. The Australian deployment is exceeding performance metrics by 32%, added Elena, operations director. Their environmental ministry is already discussing expanding the contract to cover the entire Great Barrier Reef region." Gabriela nodded, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. "And our impact numbers? Nearly 12 million tons of microplastics removed from marine environments worldwide," Elena replied, pulling up a visualization on the room's display wall. The before and after comparisons from the Philippine coastal regions are particularly striking. The meeting continued with updates on research initiatives, manufacturing efficiencies, and expansion plans. Throughout, Gabriela asked incisive questions, challenging assumptions and pushing for greater environmental impact alongside financial growth. The team that had once consisted of 5 volunteer engineers had grown to over 200 dedicated professionals, each committed to the company's dual mission of technological innovation and planetary restoration. As the meeting concluded, Gabriela's assistant appeared at the door. "Ms. Johnson, Marcus just called. He's finished his lab work early and wondered if you're available for lunch." Gabriela glanced at her schedule. "Move my call with Tokyo to tomorrow morning. Family comes first." 30 minutes later, Gabriela entered the company's dedicated research wing, a state-of-the-art facility she had insisted on building when they designed the headquarters. Marcus, now 14, stood before a massive digital display, directing a team of engineers who appeared to be hanging on his every word, despite the fact that he was half their age. "The problem isn't the filtration medium," he was explaining, manipulating a 3-dimensional model of what appeared to be a modified version of Phoenix Rising's core technology. "It's the flow rate in urban waterways. Rivers move differently than ocean currents, creating variable pressure points that affect filter efficiency." The engineers nodded, making adjustments to their notes as Marcus demonstrated his solution. A dynamically adapting intake system that could respond to changing water conditions in real time. Though he had no official title within the company, Marcus's natural brilliance and intuitive understanding of fluid dynamics had earned him the respect of even the most experienced team members. "Ready for lunch?" Gabriella asked, unable to suppress a smile of pride. Marcus looked up, his face lighting up. "Perfect timing. I just finished explaining the adaptive intake modifications." As they rode the elevator down to the company cafe, an organic, locally sourced establishment on the ground floor, Gabriella marveled at her son. At 14, he was already nearly her height, his features a harmonious blend of her warm Brazilian heritage and Richard's European ancestry. His intellect was extraordinary, but more impressive was his compassion and social awareness, qualities she had deliberately cultivated to ensure he would never become like his father. "The MIT admissions counselor called this morning," Marcus mentioned casually as they selected their meals. "They're offering early admission to their special physics program for gifted students." Gabriella nearly dropped her tray. "Marcus, that's incredible. Why didn't you call me immediately?" He shrugged, a slight smile playing at his lips. "I wanted to tell you in person. See your face." Over lunch, they discussed the opportunity. MIT's program would allow Marcus to begin university-level physics and engineering studies while completing his high school requirements. It was an honor typically reserved for students at least 2 years older. "Are you sure you're ready?" Gabriella asked, concerned about the social aspects of such acceleration. "You'd be much younger than the other students." "I've always been the youngest person in the room," Marcus replied with the self-assurance that came from growing up in laboratories and boardrooms. "Besides, I won't be going alone. Dr. Carter has agreed to serve as my advisor and will be teaching at MIT next semester." That evening, Gabriella was reviewing patent applications in her home office when her assistant called. "Sorry to disturb you after hours, Ms. Johnson, but I've just received an invitation you'll want to see immediately. Forbes wants you to be their keynote speaker for the 30 Under 30 Summit in Chicago next month." "I'm flattered, but I passed that age threshold a few years ago," Gabriella laughed. "That's just it. They want you as the featured speaker specifically because of your journey from their list to building a multi-billion-dollar company. And there's more." Her assistant paused for effect. "They're including Marcus as a special honoree in the science category, the youngest person ever featured." Gabriella felt a surge of emotion, pride in her son's accomplishments, gratification at the recognition of their journey, and a quiet vindication that the world now saw what Richard Bennett had been too blind to value. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Between managing Phoenix Rising's expanding operations and helping Marcus prepare his presentation for the Forbes event, Gabriella barely had time to consider her own speech. It wasn't until her assistant placed the final attendee list on her desk that she took a moment to scan the names of other participants. Her eyes moved quickly over the document, noting potential connections and competitors. She passed over the name Richard Bennett, Bennett Enterprises, sponsor representative, without recognition, her mind already moving to the next page of logistics. In her office's private dressing room, Gabriella adjusted the collar of her tailored suit as her stylist made final touches to her hair. The navy blue dress she would wear for the keynote speech hung nearby, an exclusive design from a Brazilian designer who had created it specifically for this occasion. "Nervous?" she asked, noticing Marcus adjusting his tie in the reflection behind her. "Not at all," he replied with characteristic confidence. "You taught me that we should never doubt our worth. Remember?" Gabriella smiled, remembering how often she had repeated those words to him throughout his childhood. A mantra born from the pain of Richard's rejection, transformed into a foundation of unshakable self-assurance. Later that evening, aboard Phoenix Rising's private jet en route to Chicago, Gabriella finalized her presentation while Marcus slept in the comfortable cabin chair across from her. The boy who had once been a burden too heavy for Richard Bennett to bear had become a brilliant young man whose future seemed limitless. Together, they had built something neither could have achieved alone, not just a successful company, but a purposeful life dedicated to healing the damage others had done to the world. "Ms. Johnson, we'll be landing in approximately 20 minutes, the pilot announced over the intercom. Gabriella gently woke Marcus, watching as he oriented himself with the quick awareness that had always characterized him. "Ready to change the world again, mio figlio?" "Always," he replied with a smile that reflected her own determination. As the lights of Chicago appeared below them, Gabriella couldn't help but reflect on the symmetry of their journey. From the darkness of rejection had come the opportunity to build something truly meaningful. From abandonment had come the freedom to define success on her own terms. Every obstacle had ultimately become a stepping stone to greater heights. What she couldn't know was that in a first-class cabin on a commercial flight also bound for Chicago, Richard Bennett was reviewing his talking points for the sponsorship presentation he would deliver at the same event. Bennett Enterprises had diminished significantly in influence over the past decade, reduced to a legacy technology provider struggling to remain relevant in a rapidly evolving market. The invitation to sponsor a portion of the Forbes event had been a rare opportunity to associate the Bennett name with innovation once again. As his plane began its descent, Richard loosened his tie slightly, feeling the pressure of representing a company that was a shadow of its former self. He had no idea that within 24 hours he would come face to face with the woman and child he had discarded 15 years earlier, now transformed into the living embodiment of everything he had lost. While Gabriella's jet crossed the night sky toward Chicago, neither she nor Richard could predict that in less than 24 hours, their separate orbits separated by 15 years would collide with enough force to irreparably destroy the reputation he still tried to preserve. The crystal chandeliers of the Four Seasons Chicago ballroom cast a warm glow over the assembled gathering of America's brightest minds and deepest pockets. Staff in crisp black uniforms moved with practiced efficiency, checking credentials and directing guests to their designated areas. Outside, a line of luxury vehicles deposited attendees beneath the hotel's imposing portico, where uniformed valets stood at attention. Marcus pressed his face against the window of their car as they approached the entrance. "Look at all the cameras," he whispered, suddenly appearing younger than his 14 years. Gabriella squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Remember, they're just people with expensive clothes. Your mind is worth more than anything they're wearing." As their car pulled to a stop, a hotel manager rushed forward, opening the door with a flourish. "Ms. Johnson, welcome to the Four Seasons Chicago. We're honored to have Phoenix Rising's leadership with us tonight." Gabriella emerged in her navy blue designer dress, its subtle, shimmering fabric catching the light as she moved. Her once wild curls were now styled in an elegant updo that accentuated her strong jawline and confident posture. Marcus followed in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, standing tall despite being significantly younger than any other attendee. The manager ushered them through a private entrance, bypassing the line of lesser VIPs waiting to check credentials. "Your suite has been prepared according to your assistant's specifications, and the event coordinator would like to review your entrance for the keynote if you have a moment before the reception." In the hotel's grand foyer, Forbes staff scurried to accommodate Gabriella's every potential need before she could express it. A far cry from the days when she had been invisible, serving drinks to people who never looked at her face. "Ms. Johnson, would you prefer to review your presentation one final time?" an event coordinator asked, tablet in hand. "Everything is ready," Gabriella replied with quiet confidence. "Though I'd like my son to have a chance to meet some of the other honorees before things get too busy." As they entered the pre-event reception, the room's energy shifted perceptibly. Conversations paused as heads turned toward Gabriella and Marcus. Within moments, they were surrounded by admirers, entrepreneurs, and investors eager for even a brief exchange. "Your filtration technology is revolutionary," gushed a venture capitalist, pressing his business card into Gabriella's hand. "I'd love to discuss potential applications in agricultural runoff management." "My firm has been following Phoenix Rising since your Series B," added another, edging closer. Your approach to combining profitability with measurable environmental impact has created an entirely new investment category. Marcus was quickly swept into a separate orbit of young innovators who regarded him with a mixture of awe and curiosity. Though all were older, they treated him as an intellectual equal, or even superior. "Is it true you developed the Riverine adaptation independently?" asked a 23-year-old software developer who had made the Forbes list for his medical diagnostics platform. "The core principles were adapted from my mother's oceanic system," Marcus replied modestly, "but the variable flow adjustment algorithm was my addition to address the specific challenges of urban waterways." Across the ballroom, Richard Bennett entered alone, adjusting his cufflinks, a nervous habit he'd developed over years of high-pressure situations. The gold sponsor badge on his lapel granted him access but not the reverence he once commanded. The Bennett Enterprises logo, once ubiquitous at such events, was now relegated to a small mention on the Supporting Sponsors banner near the bar. Richard sipped his Macallan, observing the room with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to assessing social dynamics. He noted which executives clustered together, which investors commanded attention, which startups were being courted by capital. It was a game he had once dominated. "Shame about the Davies acquisition falling through," commented an acquaintance who stopped briefly at his side. "Would have given Bennett Enterprises a foothold in the renewable sector." Richard forced a tight smile. "We're exploring several alternative strategic partnerships." As the man moved on, Richard overheard excited murmurs nearby. "She declined an $8 billion acquisition offer from Microsoft last month," a young woman whispered to her colleague. "Said Phoenix Rising's mission was too important to be absorbed into a larger corporate structure." "I heard she started as a single mother with nothing," added another voice. "Built the whole company while raising her son alone." Richard's interest piqued. He had read about Phoenix Rising's meteoric rise but hadn't connected it to any particular founder's story. "Who are you discussing?" he asked, injecting himself into their conversation. The young analysts looked surprised at his intrusion but answered politely. "Gabriella Johnson, sir, the CEO of Phoenix Rising Technologies. She's the keynote speaker tonight, and her son is being honored in the science category, youngest recipient ever." Before Richard could inquire further, the lights dimmed slightly, and a resonant voice came over the sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way to the main ballroom. Our program will begin in 15 minutes. The crowd moved obediently toward the grand double doors. Richard finished his whiskey and followed, finding his assigned table near the stage, a small courtesy for sponsors, though not in the premium section reserved for major players and featured honorees. The ballroom itself was spectacular, with towering floral arrangements and projection mapping that transformed the ceiling into a starry night sky. As Richard settled into his chair, he scanned the program booklet, flipping to the keynote speaker's biography. His blood froze as he stared at the photograph of Gabriella Johnson. Though more polished, more confident, and undeniably more sophisticated than the young waitress he'd known, her eyes were unmistakable. The same eyes that had filled with tears on that Seattle pier 15 years ago. The master of ceremonies took the stage, welcoming the assembled leaders and innovators. Richard barely heard the words, his mind racing through implications and calculations. Could it possibly be the same woman? The dates aligned disturbingly well. The mention of a son raised questions he wasn't prepared to confront. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this evening, a woman who has revolutionized environmental technology and was recently appointed by the United Nations as Ocean Ambassador, the CEO of Phoenix Rising Technologies, Gabriella Johnson. The applause was thunderous as Gabriella ascended the stage with graceful confidence. Richard choked on his fresh whiskey, drawing irritated glances from tablemates as he struggled to regain composure. It was impossible, yet undeniable. The radiant, poised woman commanding attention from the podium was the same waitress he had discarded like yesterday's newspaper. When I arrived in the United States 20 years ago, I brought only 2 suitcases with me, Gabriella began, her voice melodious yet authoritative as it echoed through the sound system. One filled with clothes and mementos from Brazil, and another filled with dreams that many would consider impossible for an immigrant without connections or privilege. Richard remained frozen in his seat, unable to tear his gaze away. Gabriella had transformed beyond recognition, not merely in appearance but in her entire being. Each gesture, each precisely chosen word radiated authority and purpose. The dress she wore probably cost more than his first car. Phoenix Rising was literally born from the scraps that others discarded, she continued, a subtle edge entering her voice that only Richard could recognize as pointed. I began by collecting electronic components rejected by large corporations that couldn't see value in what I envisioned as resources. The irony struck Richard with physical force, his stomach churning as he recalled his own cruel words. In a desperate bid to distract himself, he leaned toward an assistant seated nearby. "What's Phoenix Rising's current market valuation?" "Nearly $5 billion, the young man replied with reverence. "They turned down Microsoft's acquisition offer last month. Ms. Johnson holds 62% of the shares." Richard performed a quick mental calculation. She was worth over $3 billion, 5 times his own net worth, which had diminished following years of questionable corporate decisions. And now, I have the pleasure of introducing someone who represents not only Phoenix Rising's future, but the future of how we might reimagine our relationship with the planet, Gabriella continued, her face illuminating with genuine pride. "My son and my greatest creation, recently accepted to MIT's Prodigy Physicist program at 14, winner of this year's Young Environmental Scientist Award, Marcus Johnson." The young man who bounded onto the stage caused Richard to grip the table for support. It was like looking into a time-warped mirror, his own features reflected back at him but improved, softened, and illuminated by a warmth he had never possessed. Marcus had his eyes, his bone structure, even his confident stride, but combined with Gabriella's natural grace and a genuine smile that Richard had never mastered. For 10 spellbinding minutes, Marcus spoke about his river filtration technology, demonstrating an eloquence and knowledge that rivaled PhDs 3 times his age. The audience was captivated, and Richard devastated by the full realization of what he had rejected. When the presentations concluded, networking resumed with renewed energy. Richard observed from a distance as Gabriella and Marcus were surrounded by admirers, investors, and journalists. The woman he had once considered without formal education now discussed cutting-edge technology, global sustainability, and market strategies in perfect English, occasionally responding in Portuguese to Brazilian journalists. After an hour of self-inflicted torture, Richard finally gathered the courage to approach. Gabriella was conversing with Tesla's CEO when she sensed a presence behind her. Turning, her eyes met Richard's, without surprise, without shock, just a brief moment of recognition followed by polite indifference. "Ms. Johnson," Richard said, extending a trembling hand. "Richard Bennett, from Bennett Enterprises. Your presentation was extraordinary." Gabriella shook his hand briefly, with the firmness of someone who closed billion-dollar deals daily. "Mr. Bennett, thank you. I believe our paths crossed many years ago." "Yes," he stammered, perspiration beading on his forehead. "I wanted to congratulate you on your success. It's truly remarkable what you've built." "What we've built," she corrected, beckoning Marcus with a subtle gesture. "Marcus, this is Richard Bennett of Bennett Enterprises, an old acquaintance." Marcus extended his hand politely. "Pleasure to meet you, sir." Richard stared at the son he'd never known, paralyzed by emotion. "The pleasure is mine," he finally managed. "Your work is impressive for someone so young." "I have an excellent mentor," Marcus replied, looking admiringly at his mother. "Marcus, Dr. Lee would like to discuss your research," Gabriella said, indicating an Asian scientist nearby. As her son walked away, She turned back to Richard, her gaze subtly hardening. "He doesn't know who you are, and I prefer to keep it that way." "Gabriella, please," Richard begged, lowering his voice. "I made a terrible mistake. If I had known—" "Known what?" she interrupted, maintaining a diplomatic smile while speaking in a controlled, quiet voice. "That I would build an empire? That our son would be a genius? Would that have changed your decision to discard us like garbage?" Richard paled. "I was young, stupid, pressured by my family. And I was young, pregnant, and completely alone," she countered, still maintaining her external composure. "The difference is that I took responsibility for my choices. You lost that right 15 years ago on the Seattle pier." At that moment, a photographer from the Wall Street Journal approached. "Ms. Johnson, Mr. Bennett, may I take a photo of the two company leaders together?" Before Richard could protest, Gabriella smiled. "Of course, Mr. Bennett and I have a long history." The flash captured Gabriella's confident smile and Richard's tormented expression. What he didn't know was that this photo would be published the following week with a devastating caption. The camera flash momentarily blinded Richard as the Wall Street Journal photographer captured what appeared to be a casual encounter between two successful business leaders. What the photo couldn't reveal was the history suspended between them. 15 years of divergent paths now intersecting in this meticulously choreographed event. As the photographer thanked them and moved on, Gabriella's professional smile remained fixed while her eyes turned cold. The grand ballroom continued to buzz with activity around them, hundreds of successful people networking, completely unaware of the emotional maelstrom contained in this small pocket of space. Gabriella glanced toward Marcus, ensuring he remained engaged with the MIT scientist across the room. "I should rejoin my son," she said, her tone politely dismissive. Richard stepped closer, desperation evident in his voice. "Please, Gabriella, just a few minutes somewhere private. There's so much I need to say." She studied him dispassionately. The years had not been as kind to Richard as they had been to her. Lines of stress mapped his face, and despite his expensive suit, he carried himself with the diminished confidence of a man whose empire was crumbling. His once commanding presence now seemed hollow, a carefully maintained facade with nothing substantial behind it. "Fine," she conceded after a calculated pause. "The terrace. 5 minutes." Richard followed her through the French doors onto the hotel's expansive terrace. Chicago's skyline glittered against the night sky, the warm spring air carrying the distant sounds of urban life. They were alone except for a server arranging glasses at a remote corner bar. Gabriella walked to the stone balustrade, gazing out at the city lights. For a moment, she allowed herself to appreciate the symmetry of this moment, standing high above a different city, looking down from a position of power rather than up from a place of desperation. "I've thought about this moment," Richard began, his voice unsteady. "What I would say if I ever saw you again." "And yet I never spared you a single thought," Gabriella replied, the lie flowing easily. "Until I saw your name on the sponsors list yesterday, I'd nearly forgotten you existed." Richard winced as if physically struck. "I deserve that. I deserve far worse." "This isn't about what you deserve," she said, turning to face him fully. "It's about time management. I have a global company to run and a brilliant son to raise. You have precisely 4 minutes remaining to say whatever you came here to say." Richard ran a hand through his now graying hair. "He's incredible, Gabriella. Marcus. He has my eyes, but everything else about him, his brilliance, his confidence, his kindness, that's all you." "Thank you for acknowledging the obvious," she replied coolly. "Is that all?" "No, of course not." Richard struggled visibly to organize his thoughts. "I was cruel to you that day on the pier. Unforgivably cruel. I've regretted it every day since." "Have you?" Gabriella's eyebrow arched skeptically. "Or did you only begin to regret it when you realized who I became?" The question hung between them, damning in its accuracy. Richard's silence provided the answer she already knew. "That's what I thought," she continued. "If I had remained just a struggling single mother, you would have continued your privileged life without a second thought. Your regret is proportional to my success, not your wrongdoing." "That's not fair," he protested weakly. "Fair?" Gabriella's laugh was sharp and brief. "Was it fair when you called me a burden you'd carried for 2 years? When you questioned if the baby was even yours? When you told me to go back to whatever hole I crawled out of?" Richard paled, hearing his own cruel words echoed back to him. "I was a different person then." "No, you were exactly who you are," Gabriella corrected. "You were just more honest about it." Inside the ballroom, Gabriella could see Marcus looking around, likely searching for her. She checked her watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than Richard's first car. "Your time is up, Mr. Bennett." "Wait, please." Richard's voice cracked with desperation. "What about Marcus? He's my son too. I have a right to know him." Gabriella's expression hardened. "Rights? You're speaking of rights? You surrendered any claim to parenthood the moment you offered me a check to eliminate him." "I know, and it's unforgivable, but he's 14 years old, Richard. For 14 years he has grown up without knowing your name, your face, or your voice. He has never once asked about you with longing, only with clinical curiosity, the same way he might inquire about a historical figure." Richard looked physically ill. "Does he know? About me? About what happened?" "I've never lied to him," Gabriella confirmed. "When he was old enough to ask, I told him everything. How we met, how you abandoned us when you learned of his existence, how I built our future alone." "God, Gabriella, We need to return inside," she interrupted, already turning toward the doors. "My son is looking for me, and I have potential investors to meet." Richard reached out, his fingers barely brushing her arm. "Please, at least consider allowing me to meet him properly, not as a stranger, but as..." "As what?" Gabriella challenged, pulling away from his touch. "You're not his father. You're a genetic contributor who made a choice 15 years ago. Dr. James Carter is more of a father to Marcus than you could ever claim to be. He taught him to fish, played baseball with him, attended every science fair and school presentation." The mention of another man fulfilling the role he had abandoned struck Richard like a physical blow. He staggered slightly, gripping the stone balustrade for support. "I have nothing more to say to you," Gabriella concluded, smoothing her designer dress with practiced elegance. "Enjoy the remainder of the event, Mr. Bennett." As she reached the French doors, Richard called after her, "Will I see you again?" Gabriella paused, considering her words carefully. "I'm sure our paths will cross in the future. The business world is surprisingly small at the top." Back in the ballroom, Marcus immediately spotted her. "There you are. Where did you disappear to?" "Just getting some air," Gabriella replied, seamlessly slipping back into her role as Phoenix Rising's confident CEO. "The Tesla board wants to discuss potential collaboration on their maritime charging stations. Shall we?" For the next hour, Richard observed from a distance as Gabriella and Marcus moved through the room with practiced ease, commanding attention and respect at every turn. The contrast between their reception and his own was painfully apparent. Where once executives had competed for his attention, now he was the one hovering at the edges of conversations, hoping to be included. As the evening drew to a close, Richard made one final desperate attempt to approach them near the grand staircase. This time, however, he found his path blocked by an imposing security officer. "Excuse me, sir, but Ms. Johnson's team has requested that you maintain your distance for the remainder of the event." Humiliated, Richard retreated to the bar, ordering another Macallan and watching as Gabriella and Marcus bid farewell to admirers before departing for their suite, surrounded by an entourage of assistants and security. In his hotel room later that night, Richard stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The man looking back at him seemed diminished somehow, successful by most standards, yet hollow compared to the woman he had once discarded. She had built an empire from nothing while raising their son to be extraordinary. What had he created in that same time span? a larger version of what he had inherited, now slowly declining in relevance. His phone chimed with a notification. Out of habit, he checked it. An email from his assistant with a preliminary press release about Bennett Enterprises' participation in the Forbes event. Attached was a photo from the official photographer, Gabriella and Marcus on stage, both radiating intelligence and purpose. Richard stared at the image, focusing on the boy's features, his own eyes looking back at him, filled with a passion and brilliance he had never possessed. This child, this extraordinary young man whom he had nearly paid to eliminate, was now positioned to change the world. The realization was overwhelming. Richard collapsed onto the edge of the bathtub, head in his hands, confronting for the first time the true magnitude of what he had lost. Across the hotel, in their luxurious suite, Gabriella sat on the balcony while Marcus slept inside. The Chicago skyline sparkled before her, but her mind was back on that Seattle pier, feeling the cold wind and the colder rejection that had once shattered her world. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. James Carter. "How did it go? Did you see him?" Gabriella typed back, "Yes, exactly as expected. He regrets what he lost, not what he did." The response came quickly. "You and Marcus are extraordinary. His loss, not yours." Gabriella smiled, appreciating the support of the man who had been more of a father to Marcus than Richard could ever claim. Then she noticed an email notification from her communications director. "Wall Street Journal wants to feature your Forbes appearance in the business section." Photographer submitted several options, including one with Bennett Enterprises' CEO. Thoughts? For a long moment, Gabriella stared at the message, considering the implications. The photo would inevitably draw attention to their connection, raising questions she had successfully avoided for years. The prudent business decision would be to request a different image. Instead, she typed, "Approve the photo. No comment necessary." As she prepared for bed, Gabriella found herself unusually reflective. The confrontation with Richard had affected her more than she cared to admit. Not because any feelings remained. Those had died on the pier 15 years ago, but because she realized how completely their roles had reversed. Once, he had held all the power, callously deciding her fate with a checkbook and cruel words. Now she controlled not only her destiny but increasingly his as well. The realization brought not joy but a complex satisfaction, not that she had achieved revenge, but that she had proven herself right and him catastrophically wrong. Tomorrow, she and Marcus would return to Seattle on their private jet, back to their empire and their purposeful life. Richard would return to his fading company, carrying the weight of his greatest mistake. While the flash captured Gabriella's confident smile and Richard's tormented expression, what he didn't know was that this photo would be published the following week with a devastating caption. The photo that captured Gabriella's confident smile and Richard's tormented expression appeared in the Wall Street Journal exactly 7 days after the Forbes event. The image occupied a prominent position on the first page of the business section, but it was the caption beneath that sent shockwaves through the corporate world. Phoenix Rising acquires controlling interest in Bennett Enterprises in surprise market move. Richard Bennett's phone began ringing at 5:30 in the morning. Still groggy from another night of troubled sleep plagued by thoughts of Gabriella and Marcus, he fumbled for the device on his nightstand. "Richard, have you seen it?" His CFO's voice was tight with panic. "The Journal. You need to get to the office immediately." Within 40 minutes, Richard burst through the doors of the Bennett Enterprises headquarters, the building that had once been the crown jewel of his family's legacy. Security guards who had greeted him respectfully for decades now regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and pity. The news was spreading fast. The executive conference room was already filled with grim-faced board members when Richard arrived. Copies of the Wall Street Journal lay open on the polished mahogany table, the damning headline visible from every seat. Richard's own face stared back at him from the page, caught in a moment of visible distress beside Gabriella's serene confidence. "What the hell is going on, Richard?" demanded Harold Winters, the board chairman, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. We received formal notification an hour ago that Phoenix Rising Technologies now controls 56% of our voting shares. 56%. How did this happen without any of us knowing? Richard collapsed into his chair, struggling to process the information. This can't be right. It has to be a mistake. The chief financial officer slid a document across the table. It's no mistake. According to these filings, Phoenix Rising has been systematically acquiring shares through various holdings for the past 6 months. The final 19% was purchased yesterday from several board members who apparently received private offers they couldn't refuse. All eyes turned accusingly toward 3 board members who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The offer was 40% above market value. One of them muttered defensively. It was a purely financial decision. Richard stared at the document, the room spinning around him. How did we miss this? How did our market surveillance not pick up on the pattern? They were incredibly sophisticated about it, explained the CFO. Multiple shell companies, staggered purchases just below reporting thresholds, offshore accounts. Someone orchestrated this with military precision. The board's attention returned to Richard. You were photographed with Gabriella Johnson at the Forbes event, said Winters, his eyes narrowing. The journal implies you have a long history. Explain yourself, Richard. Richard loosened his tie, suddenly finding it difficult to breathe. We met years ago, before she founded Phoenix Rising. And you never thought to mention this connection during our strategic discussions about environmental technology competitors? The accusation in the CFO's voice was unmistakable. We've been losing market share to Phoenix Rising for years while you assured us they were a temporary phenomenon. Before Richard could formulate a response, the conference room door opened. His assistant entered, her face pale. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a call for Mr. Bennett on line 1. It's Gabriella Johnson. A heavy silence fell over the room. Richard stared at the blinking light on the conference phone as if it were a bomb about to detonate. With a trembling hand, he reached forward and pressed the speaker button. Gabriella, he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. Mr. Bennett. Her voice filled the room, cool and professional. I imagine you're in the middle of a rather intense board meeting right now. I won't keep you long. Richard glanced at the stunned faces around him. You've orchestrated quite a surprise. Not personal, Richard. It's business. Her tone was calculatedly casual. Your company was undervalued and possesses patents that complement our product line. Your shareholders will receive an excellent return on their investment. You're lying, Richard accused, his composure cracking. This is about the past, about what I did to you. The silence that followed lasted several excruciating seconds. The board members exchanged confused glances. Richard, you overestimate your importance in my current life, Gabriella finally replied, each word precisely chosen. It's been 15 years since you chose not to be part of it. This acquisition was recommended by our strategic analysis team months ago. Your presence in the company is irrelevant to the decision. Her indifference cut deeper than any direct attack could have. The board members watched Richard with growing suspicion as the color drained from his face. And what about Marcus? He asked, forgetting momentarily about his audience. He has the right to know who his father is. An audible gasp rippled through the room. Richard immediately regretted his words, but it was too late. Marcus has a father figure, my university mentor, who taught him to fish, played baseball with him, and attended every one of his school presentations, Gabriella responded, her voice finally betraying a hint of emotion. What do you have to offer beyond DNA and belated regret? Richard had no answer. We're holding a restructuring event at the former Bennett headquarters in Seattle next week, Gabriella continued, her professional tone returning. You're invited to attend if you wish. We'll be announcing our scholarship initiative for young people from disadvantaged communities interested in environmental technology. The irony was cutting. "I'll be there," Richard promised, desperate for any opportunity to connect. "Good day, Mr. Bennett. I look forward to a smooth transition of leadership." The line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in the room stared at Richard, the implications of the conversation sinking in. "You have a son with Gabriella Johnson?" Winters finally asked, his voice low with disbelief. "The CEO who just acquired our company?" "It's complicated," Richard began weakly. "Uncomplicated," demanded Winters. "Now." Over the next hour, Richard revealed the shameful truth. His relationship with Gabriella 15 years earlier, her pregnancy, his cruel rejection. With each detail, the expressions around the table shifted from shock to disgust. "Let me understand this correctly," said Janet Chen, the only woman on the board. "You abandoned a pregnant woman, questioned the paternity of your child, and suggested she terminate the pregnancy. That same woman has now built a company powerful enough to acquire the very empire you inherited, and the son you rejected is a recognized genius being courted by MIT at 14. Put so succinctly, the narrative was devastating. Richard had no defense to offer. "I think we've heard enough," said Winters, standing abruptly. "The board will need to discuss next steps privately. Richard, given the circumstances, we request you take a leave of absence effective immediately." 7 days later, Richard stood in the lobby of what had once been Bennett Enterprises headquarters. The familiar logo had already been replaced with the Phoenix Rising emblem, a stylized bird emerging from oceanic waves. Security guards who didn't recognize him checked his ID carefully before allowing him entry. The grand atrium was filled with people, employees, press, and students from local schools. A podium had been set up at the center, bearing the Phoenix Rising logo. Richard moved through the crowd like a ghost, unrecognized by people who had once scrambled to impress him. At precisely 10 o'clock, Gabriella took the stage to announce the transition and new initiatives. She looked immaculate in a tailored suit, her presence commanding instant respect from the assembled crowd. Some of you may remember the Brazilian waitress who served coffee at Pike Place Market. Others might know only the CEO who developed technology to clean the oceans that surround our country. "I am both," she declared, her gaze sweeping the audience until it found Richard. "I built this from nothing while raising an exceptional son alone." Richard's heart raced, fearing public exposure, but Gabriella merely smiled and continued, "And that's why I understand the value of opportunity. Our scholarship program will invest $50 million annually in young people who, like me once, need only a chance to transform the world." After the presentation, Richard tried desperately to approach Gabriella, but her team of assistants formed an impenetrable barrier. It was Marcus who noticed his persistence and approached him. "Mr. Bennett, correct? You seem very interested in speaking with my mother." Richard swallowed hard, looking into eyes that mirrored his own. "Yes, I greatly admire her work, and yours as well." Marcus studied his face with an intensity that felt familiar. "You know, people always say I have my father's eyes." Richard froze. "You know who I am?" "I've always known," Marcus replied calmly. "My mother never lied to me. When I was old enough to ask, she told me everything. How you met, how you left her when you learned about my existence, how she built our future alone." "Marcus, I made a terrible mistake," Richard began, his voice breaking. "Mr. Bennett, congratulations on the merger," Marcus interrupted, extending his hand formally as if greeting a stranger. "My mother always teaches that we should treat everyone with dignity, even those who didn't offer us the same." The formal handshake was the most painful thing Richard had ever experienced, so close yet so distant from his own son. "I'd like the chance to know you," Richard tried one last time. Marcus smiled politely. "Perhaps someday, but not today. I have a presentation at MIT next week and need to prepare. Besides," he added, looking toward Gabriella, who was conversing with investors across the room, "my mother already has everything we need." As Richard watched Marcus walk away, he felt the full weight of what he had lost. Not just a family, but the chance to be part of something truly extraordinary. The empire that could have been his future had been built without him and was greater than anything he would have achieved alone. Outside the building, Gabriella and Marcus entered their customized electric Mercedes. As the driver pulled away from the curb, Marcus asked, "Do you think I did the right thing, speaking with him?" Gabriella smiled, holding her son's hand. "You always do the right thing because you act with integrity. That's what makes you exceptional, not your genes." "I don't feel angry at him," Marcus confessed. "Just nothing. It's strange to look at someone who should mean so much and feel no connection at all. Family isn't defined by blood, but by the people who choose to stay when they have the option to leave," Gabriella replied, looking out at Seattle, the city that had witnessed her greatest pain and her greatest triumph. "We both chose to stay for each other, every day. That's what matters." As the car glided through the streets, passing the same pier where Richard had abandoned her 15 years before, Gabriella Johnson felt finally complete. Not because she had acquired the company of the man who had rejected her, but because she had proven to herself that her worth could never be measured by the myopic judgment of someone who saw only her skin color and her Brazilian passport, not the unbreakable brilliance of her American determination. The true victory wasn't in acquiring a corporate empire, but in creating an extraordinary young man and building a meaningful life that never needed external validation to be significant. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.